It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to the Phil Ferguson Show. This is show number 495, almost to 500. I'd like to say that I have something special planned, but I don't. I can barely find the time to get these things out the way that it is. Fortunately for myself and my wife, we went down to Miami Beach and just hung out for a couple days. We went to a convention called SuperCon. It's like Comic-Con, but quite a bit smaller. It was only 20,000 people, and we got to meet and get pictures with David Tennant. Yes, that's right. Doctor Who was in the house, and wow, what a process that was. You get in this line, and you have to get rid of all your props unless you're going to hold them, because they tell you David is not going to hold your props for you. He will not hold anything. And you get in a line and they go, boom, boom, go, 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 go. And the problem that told us for glasses is to make sure your glasses are up and your chin is down. And so apparently I overdid it because I look like, I don't know, maniacal, because I'm just barely looking under my eyebrows. But whatever. It was fun. We got pictures. We got to see a lot of vendors, talk to some people in the crowd. This one was a lot of cartoon, a lot of anime, and maybe they're all that way. It's just not something I'm that into. And of course, it had all the Star Trek, the Star Wars, lots of other stuff. Great fun. They had a techno rave one night. Sat in and listened to that for a while. Good music, good DJ, but a lot of fun. They had food available. They had drinks available. Prices were high, of course, but everything's high in Miami Beach. It actually wasn't higher than restaurants outside, but Miami Beach apparently has this thing where if you eat in a restaurant, I didn't see any notices, but they automatically add 20% to the bill, which if you're going to automatically add 20% to the bill, no matter what, then you should just raise your prices by 20% and just pay your people living wages and tell us not to tip. But whatever. It's the system that we live in, and it's goofy. So yeah, pretty expensive to eat and drink at Miami Beach. Good fun. We did spend a few hours hanging out on the beach. Had a really nice place pretty close to the surf, and a nice umbrella, thankfully, because I burn way too easily. But we just kind of hung out. That was really cool. Very relaxing. And of course, when you're kind of even close to the surf, after about 30 or 40 minutes, if you lick your lips, you get a nice salty treat. So that was special. Other things, we happened to have cause to drive to Miami Beach and back twice over the last 10 days. And one of them, I tried another new, different strategy with my car. Previously, I've given some reports about how long it takes to charge. Something like 54 minutes, maybe 50 minutes, driving really fast, and then something around 40 minutes. And I thought I could get up to 30. And in this case, I did. And I changed where I stopped. Instead of going to Electrify America stations, which are free to me for 2 years because of the car that I bought, and I'm almost 1 year into that, and I've got another year free, I decided, well, I'll just pay, but I want to find the places that are the most ideal. And there's a lot of criteria that go into that. If you really want me to bore you with it, send me an email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com, and I can walk you through all the things running around in my head to decide where to stop. But we ended up going to 2 different FPL, that's Florida Power and Light, charging stations. And Florida Power and Light is doing a bang-up job of putting out electric charging stations. Absolutely amazeballs. And you would think it's Florida. They wouldn't, but they're doing it. Some of the first locations they put in are kind of shaky, but the more recent ones are just crushing it. Absolutely fantastic equipment, high end. The places that we stopped are rated for 240 kilowatt, and theoretically my car, the Ioniq 6, can get up to 240 kilowatt. And I was worried that I would end up getting something like 210 or 205, but I got pretty close to the 240 on these two stations, and the ones that I picked were pretty close to the road, but because they aren't Electrify America and free to thousands of people, there was one or two cars there, right? 4 to 6 charging towers with plenty of open spots. So you just pull in, and the very first one I had some struggles with figuring out how to make it work. And this is one of the problems with the industry. It's not a horribly bad thing if you're relatively computer savvy, but for Florida Power and Light, you have to have their app, and you have to have it installed on your phone, and you have to have a method of payment set up. And my first method of payment was a credit card, and for whatever reason, it wasn't working. And I don't know if it's an out-of-date credit card. I don't think so. Or if that credit card somehow doesn't like that app, maybe. Or if the app doesn't like the credit card, maybe. And I set up Google Pay, and boom, went right away. So fast. We were talking about pretty close to the time that it would take you to pull up, open up your gas cap, and put the nozzle in and start pumping gas. So it was real tight. I really liked that. And because of the high speed, and it was really hot, which didn't really affect my ability to charge, at least up to 70% state of charge on the battery. Above that, I had bigger speed drop off of charging than I expected. But because I was already gaming the system, my goal was to get really low and then only charge to 70%. Even though this car charges fast from 70 to 80, it's not as fast as from 60 to 70. And it's not as fast from 30% battery to 40% battery. The higher you get on the battery curve, the higher the state of charge, SOC, you can have slightly slower and slower charging, particularly above 55, 60%. I went to 70. One could probably go from 5% state of charge to 55% state of charge and go have an even average faster time. But at some point, you're only adding half the battery, not 60 or 70% of the battery. Anywho, more details than you needed. In this case, everything worked almost perfect. And it was 15 minutes at the first charge and 15 minutes at the second charge. So our drive from north of Orlando all the way down to Miami Beach and back, slightly over 420, maybe 400, no, not 500, 520, 530, 540 miles, something like that. I'll call it 530. 530 miles was 30 minutes of charging. Now that's starting with a full charge. So you can go 500 plus miles and stop only twice, doing 2 15-minute stops. And of course, if you stop, and one of them was chargers were in a parking lot of a Panera. So we got soup and a sandwich, used the bathroom. We ended up stopping the charger at 15 minutes, and it took another minute or two to finish eating. One stop was at what did they call it? The service station, the rest area along the turnpike of Florida's Turnpike. And it took my wife longer to go inside and order us some breakfast sandwiches at a Dunkin' Donuts and bring them back out than it took to charge the car. So if you're just going to drive just straight out, not stop for anything, this was longer than gas, but only by a few minutes. But if you stop to use the bathroom or to get some food, this is now on parity with using a gas car. You would not have saved any time driving in this manner with this car by using gasoline versus electricity. It is amazing. It was, 15-minute stop. What you're ordering food or eating food, going to the bathroom. It really doesn't add any time. So I'm perfectly happy. And for me, 9 to 10 hour road trip down and back in total, 30 minutes, 2 15-minute stops, and you're getting food. Absolutely amazing. So the second trip, we started with a low state of charge, probably, 50% or below. And again, this was just another experiment. And we went to 2 different chargers that I had not charged at before. Actually, one I had, but the first one was another rest area stop. And it had 2 towers that had 2 connectors each. So 4 cars could charge, but one of the 4 was a CHAdeMO. And that's only used by Nissan Leaf and a few other limited cars that are out there. But you couldn't use it if you didn't have a CHAdeMO adapter, which I don't have an adapter from CHAdeMO to CCS. So there's only 3 viable connections, and there were 3 cars there. And matter of fact, there was 4 cars there. So there was somebody already waiting. And one of the cars was already around 90% state of charge, and it was a slow charging car on top of that. This is one of the reasons I didn't want to have the Bolt anymore. I didn't want to be at one of these places for 30 or 40 minutes, not only for my own personal benefit, but for the benefit of others. But they weren't even in the car. They had gone inside. So it just kept trickling away, adding. And so the person in front of me was there 20 minutes before me, and we were there 20 minutes. So she waited 40 minutes. I'm trying to be fair with you guys. I have one case where it went really well, and this one, it's a stop that I shouldn't have stopped at. It's a location I shouldn't have used because of only 3 connectors. It's much easier to get backed up when you have only a few connectors. So she waited 40 minutes. We waited about 20 minutes because right after one car left, another car left. And we were charging probably for 10 minutes, and there was a boom. And I don't know if that's a loud fuse popping or something exploded inside of the machine, but it no longer charged cars. And her goal was to get to 80%. She was at 79, so she left. I was not at my goal, but I had added a good amount in 9 minutes, and that's another reason why a high speed charging car is nice. We had enough to continue and ended up, stopping a little further down the road. The place that we stopped at next was a Florida Power and Light charging location, but the equipment is all ChargePoint equipment and using the ChargePoint system, which I knew right away. And it was very easy for me because not only did I have the Florida Power and Light app, but I have the ChargePoint app on my phone. And ChargePoint is really nice if you have it all set up in your phone, because you just pull up and you tap your phone. It's like, pay to tap, like at a credit card reader. You just put your phone up next to the machine and it recognizes your account and it says go, right? It was a few seconds slower than the Florida Power and Light ones that were working really well, but still pretty fast. So, these are things that are nice. What these stations don't have, and it looks like most of them aren't going to have, is credit card readers. I would have thought it would have been nice, because people that are used to doing that with gasoline, that's one less barrier for them to transition to electric charging. But you're going to need a phone. You're going to need a phone with apps. You're going to need the right apps. You're going to need to have your credit cards set up, or Google Pay or Apple Pay, Apple Pay, whatever it is, set up on your device to be able to use these things. And in this case, there were 2 towers. There were a total of 6 towers, but they're in pairs. So there's 3 sets of 2. And they can put out a total of 125 kilowatt. And again, I stopped here because I wanted to. It was an experiment. And I thought, okay, I'd get, 125 kilowatt. But because they were paired, they were shared. And a lot of Tesla stations do this. But thankfully, the sharing is a considerably higher amount than just the 125. And the tower that I hooked up to, someone else was already using the other pairing part, and they were getting 90 kilowatt. And I thought, great, I'll get 90 as well. No, I got like 30. And that was a bit of a buzzkill. The lucky thing for me is that the guy who was already there finished up in just a couple of minutes. And so as soon as he disconnected, I jumped up to 120, which was great. It's no 240, mind you, but we're only talking about a few extra minutes and we're already there. We're already charging, and the charging speed jumped up dramatically. Someone else came to charge and plugged in next to me, and they got the same problem that I had before, is that if you're already charging, if you're charging by yourself, you get like 120. If another person hooks up, then it jumps to 90 and it gives the other person 30. So he was only getting 30 and I was still getting 90. Again, not as fast, not ideal, but it's not so bad. But this trip was not going to set any any charging speed records. So under an ideal machine, I'm thinking maybe I can get it down to 12-minute stops, 13-minute stops. Maybe I'll have a chance to do that in a few months. That might be easier if I do it when it's not so bloody hot. Ideal, of course, is not using air conditioning or heating, because the air conditioning probably takes 5% off of your range. Another thing that I saw several people do is when they're charging, they just sit in their car and they turn off the air conditioning. You don't need to do that. You don't need to do that at all. I did not need to do that when I drove a Chevy Bolt. While driving, the air conditioning can take 5, 7. I don't think it's going to take 10% of your range, but it does reduce your range. It doesn't really materially slow down the amount of electricity going into your batteries. You probably will actually pull a little bit more electricity from the tower to run the electricity, but your battery's going to take what your battery takes. And so no need to suffer. Now, if you're just being environmentally conscious and you don't want to run the air conditioning while you're just sitting there enjoying the heat, cool. You don't have to run your air conditioning. But these days that we traveled, it was 95 plus or minus and 80% humidity, real feel, 105 to 110. So I ran the air conditioning. Could I have charged faster without the air conditioning? No, probably not. It's not really relevant. The other thing to keep in mind is that if your car can charge at 240, like mine can, 240 kilowatt, and it's from like 3 or 4% state of charge of the battery to 50, 55%. And that all happens in like 8 minutes. If you're only getting 120, it's 16 minutes. So you're adding 8 minutes. Once the battery gets fuller, it doesn't charge as fast anyway, so the time differential is not as dramatic. Also saw a couple people that had stopped at 50 or 60% wanting to charge the car because they didn't want to get below 50% state of charge because they were nervous about range and range anxiety. I get it, but they're going to charge slower. And not only is it slower for them, but it's slower for everyone else waiting. So these are things that will get better as cars charge faster, as equipment gets upgraded, as there are more locations, more towers per location. All of these things improve. I do know that most Teslas can charge at a peak of 250 kilowatt, which is 10 above mine, an insignificant difference. The big difference with Teslas is that's normally between like 5 and 20% state of charge, and then it's a gradual decline all the way to 100%. My car will hold that speed of 240 for a much longer period of time. So if you're charging from 10 to 70 or 10 to 80, my car will charge 20, 30, 40% faster than a Tesla on the ideal equipment. And so that's very nice. And I had those 2 stops, absolutely fantastic. Got back to the house with extra range. And like I said, I might try to see if I can beat the total of 30 minutes of charging time if and when I have another trip to Miami. And I might at some point break down and buy lighter wheels and tires with higher sidewalls because you don't want to change the total diameter of the tire. But the lighter wheels can increase the range of this car by something close to 20%. And so if you increase range by 20%, one would assume you decrease charging time by 20%. So I think theoretically, if I have the right, better, more efficient wheels on, if I go when I don't have to run air conditioning or heat, and I get the right chargers at the right time, that I can go all the way down and back and have total charging of 20 minutes. I think that's going to be the theoretical maximum for this bad boy. I think the only way it could be technically easier is that if I get just enough range to make it all the way to Miami or Miami Beach, or if I take a state road where I can go a little slower, if I can make it all the way to my destination and stay in a hotel with a charger, I could just plug the car in overnight, and over 5 or 6 or 8 hours, it would charge and I'd be 100% full in the morning. In that case, my total charging time on the road would be essentially 0. And that'd be kind of cool. And we're getting down to shaving off minutes here. So, I think for this car, the practical reality is 30 to 40 minutes of charging in a 500 to 600 mile drive. That's what you're looking at. So if you can do that without stopping for gas, okay, you win. But if you're going to stop to pee, if you're going to stop to get a little bit of food, a car like this is on parity with gasoline. All right, more than you ever wanted to know. What we've got coming up in this show, we are going to talk about Project 2025, quite a bit about it. And that's with Amanda Marcotte, and you're going to love her, and you're going to love what she has to talk about. She's an expert in this. I also do have a short little segment on an AI trading bot where it claims you're going to get rich using artificial intelligence. And at this point, I'm convinced that artificial intelligence is a whole lot of hype without a whole lot of substance. Will it change things in the future? Of course, everything changes something else. Things change all the time. It'll be a continual change, but it's not magic, because if a bit of AI figures out how to trade and make money better than people, people will adapt and start doing what the AI bot is doing, and then it won't be special and unique anymore. This is just the way how markets work. As soon as someone finds a way to outperform the market consistently, which is nearly impossible, but it has happened in the past, as soon as that becomes known to other people, it doesn't work anymore. So we'll see what happens, but I wouldn't spend a whole lot of money on something. Just stick to the really simple, the really plain index funds, keeping your trading low, keeping your taxes low, keeping your expenses low, annual adjustments, and keeping an eye on the ball, and knowing some things about how the market works, like I've talked about on the show many times, avoiding intermediate and long-term bonds when interest rates were at record lows. We dodged a whole lot of negative downside. I guess that's redundant. Negative downside. We dodged a whole lot of bad by not being in intermediate and long-term bonds when interest rates were at their lowest. Because once they start going up, those bonds get crushed. So very excited about that. The one thing to keep an eye on is in the last year and a half, large cap growth has done phenomenal. Yay. I'm delighted we balanced back into that around the beginning of 2023. Yeah, that's 18 months ago. Prior to that, I had been doing 60% value and 40% growth. And in calendar year 2022, growth dropped 35%. And we went to 50-50. And growth has been crushing it since then. So just keep an eye on that and do your rebalance if you haven't done it in 6 months to a year. And I'm going to wrap up, and we're going to hear about the AI bot, and we're going to talk to Amanda after this little break. The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Investments should be based on your personal situation, and you, of course, should consult with your financial advisor or tax professional before taking any actions. I'm sure you've heard the saying, it's too good to be true, and I'm certain this is one of those cases. Listener sent me a link to a website, and I don't know. You can Google it yourself. I'm not going to give you the website. I don't want to give them the PR, but for $450, you can buy a bit of software that's going to make you rich. Absolutely rich. One bit of claim here is that you can make $38,000 weekly. So why wouldn't you spend $450 if you can make $38,000 every week? And they talk about a second run of this software turned $1,000 into $5,600, a 560% increase in just a few months earlier in 2024. So, of course, you're going to want to spend the $450. Let's see, what else do they have here? Skeptics were convinced when they went to the fully disclosed page of trading, and they give you information on how to go find the actual trades that they made. And of course, you have no way to know. Maybe they ran this software 1,000 times with different conditions and parameters, and one of them worked. And that's the one they send you to, and they can confirm that they put in $1,000 and it went to 56,000 in this one case, but it may not ever work again. Or, it's 1 out of 1,000 or 1 out of 100, and the other 99% of the time you underperform or lose everything. They don't disclose how many times they ran it. The other thing, of course, is that if this actually worked, why would they bother selling the software? $450? If you could make $56,000 every couple of months, why would you mess with selling something for $450? Plus, it is a well-known thing in the history of the stock market. From time to time, people find little tricks where if you buy certain things in a certain way at a certain time on a certain day and sell them in a very certain special way, this is one of the problems with back-tested data. Even if it does actually work, as soon as this trick becomes known to more than just a handful of people, it no longer works. And so even if this bot somehow did magically pick winners and losers and you bought the software, soon it wouldn't work. Of course, this is not new. It's just new to call it AI or a bot. People have written software and code and programs and models and schemes to beat the market for as long as there's been a market. And for the most part, none of them work. And the really, really challenging part is that you don't know which one of the 100 that you might look at will actually work for you after you put your money in. So I'm not going to read all of this, but it's filled with buzzwords and promises of great returns. And I don't know if this is strictly legal since they're selling software. Maybe they're not mentioning any specific stocks, but it has all the red flags, of promises, and this will work for you, and it's only $450. And people were skeptical, but now they've been convinced because they went and looked at the data. So just a little something to watch out for. This is the kind of stuff that homeopaths use, that psychics use, all the scammers use. They're going to promise you something that's quick and easy and a huge profit, and all you have to do is give them your money. Well, if it was that easy, like I said, why would they bother? If I could make $38,000 reliably off of a couple $1,000s every few months, I'd probably be going and doing that. I mean, I like my job, but that sounds like a lot of fun and an easy way to get rich. And easy ways to get rich generally, almost always, just don't work.
Section 2. Is the Old Testament inspired? If it is, it should be a book that no man, no number of men could produce. It should contain the perfection of philosophy. It should perfectly accord with every fact in nature. There should be no mistakes in astronomy, geology, or as to any subject or science. Its morality should be the highest, the purest. Its laws and regulations for the control of conduct should be just, wise, perfect, and perfectly adapted to the accomplishment of the ends desired. It should contain nothing calculated to make man cruel, revengeful, vindictive, or infamous. It should be filled with intelligence, justice, purity, honesty, mercy, and the spirit of liberty. It should be opposed to strife and war, to slavery and lust, to ignorance, credulity, and superstition. It should develop the brain and civilize the heart. It should satisfy the heart and brain of the best and wisest. It should be true. Does the Old Testament satisfy this standard? Is there anything in the Old Testament, in history, in theory, in law, in government, in morality, in science, above and beyond the ideas, the beliefs, the customs, and prejudices of its authors and the people among whom they lived? Is there one ray of light from any supernatural source? The ancient Hebrews believed that this earth was the center of the universe, and that the sun, moon, and stars were specks in the sky. With this, the Bible agrees. They thought the earth was flat, with 4 corners, that the sky, the firmament, was solid, the floor of Jehovah's house. The Bible teaches the same. They imagined that the sun journeyed about the earth, and that by stopping the sun, the day could be lengthened. The Bible agrees with this. They believed that Adam and Eve were the first man and woman, that they had been created but a few years before, and that they, the Hebrews, were their direct descendants. This the Bible teaches. If anything is, or can be certain, the writers of the Bible were mistaken about creation, astronomy, geology, about the causes of phenomena, the origin of evil, and the cause of death. Now it must be admitted that if an infinite being is the author of the Bible, he knew all sciences, all facts, and could not have made a mistake. If then there are mistakes, misconceptions, false theories, ignorant myths, and blunders in the Bible, it must have been written by finite beings, that is to say, by ignorant and mistaken men. Nothing can be clearer than this. For centuries, the Church insisted that the Bible was absolutely true, that it contained no mistakes, that the story of creation was true, that its astronomy and geology were in accord with the facts, that the scientists who differed with the Old Testament were infidels and atheists. Now this has changed. The educated Christians admit that the writers of the Bible were not inspired as to any science. They now say that God, or Jehovah, did not inspire the writers of his book for the purpose of instructing the world about astronomy, geology, or any science. They now admit that the inspired men who wrote the Old Testament knew nothing about any science, and that they wrote about the earth and stars, the sun and moon, in accordance with the general ignorance of the time. It required many centuries to force the theologians to this admission. Reluctantly, full of malice and hatred, the priests retired from the field, leaving the victory with science. They took another position. They declared that the authors, or rather the writers of the Bible, were inspired in spiritual and moral things, that Jehovah wanted to make known to his children his will and his infinite love for his children, that Jehovah, seeing his people wicked, ignorant, and depraved, wished to make them merciful and just, wise and spiritual, and that the Bible is inspired in its laws, in the religion it teaches, and in its ideas of government. This is the issue now. Is the Bible any nearer right in its ideas of justice, of mercy, of morality, or of religion than in its conception of the sciences? Is it moral? It upholds slavery. It sanctions polygamy. Could a devil have done worse? Is it merciful? In war it raised the black flag. It commanded the destruction, the massacre of all, of the old, infirm, and helpless, of wives and babes. Were its laws inspired? Hundreds of offenses were punished with death. To pick up sticks on Sunday, to murder your father on Monday were equal crimes. There is in the literature of the world no bloodier code. The law of revenge, of retaliation, was the law of Jehovah. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a limb for a limb. This is savagery, not philosophy. Is it just and reasonable? The Bible is opposed to religious toleration, to religious liberty. Whoever differed with the majority was stoned to death. Investigation was a crime. Husbands were ordered to denounce and to assist in killing their unbelieving wives. It is the enemy of art. Thou shalt make no graven image. This was the death of art. Palestine never produced a painter or a sculptor. Is the Bible civilized? It upholds lying, larceny, robbery, murder, the selling of diseased meat to strangers, and even the sacrifice of human beings to Jehovah. Is it philosophical? It teaches that the sins of a people can be transferred to an animal, to a goat. It makes maternity an offense for which a sin offering had to be made. It was wicked to give birth to a boy, and twice as wicked to give birth to a girl. To make hair oil like that used by the priests was an offense punishable with death. The blood of a bird killed over running water was regarded as medicine. Would a civilized God daub his altars with the blood of oxen, lambs, and doves? Would he make all his priests butchers? Would he delight in the smell of burning flesh?
You're listening to The Bill Ferguson Show.
Welcome back, everybody. As promised, today I have Amanda Marcotte. How the heck are you?
Good. How are you?
I am well. As we were talking in pre-show, which doesn't really exist. You've been on before, but it's been many years, so welcome back. And just for fun, I was looking at your Wikipedia page.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, I had a Wikipedia page for about 5 minutes once. But you have a Wikipedia page, and the mind-altering traumatic event that's listed here in 2007, which I'm thinking you got to step up your game, is that you used vulgar language to describe the Catherine doctrine on the virgin birth of Jesus. And I was like, that's it. That's the thing that made your Wikipedia page.
Yeah. I was working for the John Edwards campaign, and that didn't last long because right-wing trolls dug up some dirty jokes I made, and it was a whole thing. It seems kind of quaint now. It really does.
It's so adorbs. And just by the way, that you are fully permitted to swear. You don't have to. You're not obligated, but you can on the podcast. It has a naughty mark on it, so it's good. The listeners know. And I think we first met at like Skepticon 4 or 3 back in Missouri. I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago. Does that sound right?
It's been a long time. Yeah, it's been a minute. I sometimes am shocked at how much time has passed.
It is a funny thing with time. And you and I visited this last year. Was it at American Atheist Conference?
Yeah. I presented. I did a presentation on trad wives and DJ'd the party. That was kind of wild.
That was.
Yeah, it was a good time.
And it's so funny. My listeners probably know that I have a history of DJing, and I was like, oh, I'm just gonna go up and check out who's DJing and what kind of stuff they're using. And I walk up there and I go, oh my God, it's Amanda. I was surprised. I didn't know you were going to be doing that. So.
Yeah, I do that once in a while. I occasionally take money to play music. It's a thing.
Yeah. Well, I used to do weddings all the time, and that's more fancier weddings where they had lights and decorations and stuff like that. So it's always good fun, or mostly good fun. But now, and particularly you and I, well, I want to. We'll talk about whatever you want to talk about, of course. But Project 2025, and what's going on? What does it say? And of course, we can't cover all 920 plus pages of this document in a brief conversation. But what is Project 2025, and where the fuck did it come from?
So Project 2025 should be understood primarily as the real Republican platform.
Yeah.
Whatever they're rolling out, this like nonsense document at the convention next week should basically be ignored because Project 2025 is it. And it's put together by the Heritage Foundation and a bunch of other far-right groups, like the Alliance Defending Freedom and SBA List, which is a major anti-abortion organization, other groups like that. And it's basically a blueprint for the Trump administration. They call themselves the Presidential Transition Project, which is to say they basically have created the playbook for how Trump can come into the White House and rapidly remake the federal government into, and I really hope people do not think I am exaggerating because I am not, but a fascist American project. So turning 200 plus years of American democracy and secularism into Christian nationalism and fascism as quickly as possible. Like a huge part of their goal is to, as authoritarians and fascists always do, there's this belief that they have to act quickly so that the resistance doesn't have a chance to sort of organize against them. There's always a blitz strategy with this kind of this kind of effort. So some of the top line things that they want to do: ban abortion nationwide, ban pornography. They definitely suggest that contraception is restricting it is in the works. They want to drastically restrict LGBTQ rights. They really want to push a Christian nationalist agenda with government power, and they also really want to decimate the ability of the federal government to regulate business, regulate the environment, protect labor rights, protect the law.
Yeah.
And their goal is to empty out the federal bureaucracy that does all those things.
Yeah, because, that just gutting entire departments and not only dramatically reducing or eliminating things like the Department of Education, which still sounds like a moronic thing to say out loud, but yet here they are. Multiple presidential candidates for the Republican Party have said this over many, many years. Pretty much end public education, or at least federal oversight or management of it, and it would go to states, which of course then they could work state by state to eliminate it, because they don't want money from rich people going to educate poor people. Is that fair to say? Am I overdoing it there?
No, I think, yeah. So the reason that education is so central to this kind of agenda is that's really a excuse me.
Yeah.
That really is a place where the two kind of wings of the Republican Party, which is to say, the Christian fundamentalists and the class warriors, for lack of a better term, can kind of come together and shake hands. And there's a lot of overlap between those two groups, but there's somewhat divergent goals and desires, especially when in the spaces where there's not overlap. But functionally, you have a lot of rich Republicans who want to, they despise any kind of social spending or programs that increase economic equality. And one of those, of course, is public education, because
right.
They really resent how public education makes it easier for people who don't have means to educate their children and often get them into college and competing on the labor market with the children of the wealthy, right?
Yeah,
so
that's not a big surprise.
They would like to get rid of that. And then you have the Christian nationalists who resent public education because it's secular. It teaches science, it teaches facts, it does not teach religion. They want to replace public education with either religious schools or no school at all. And I think that you can kind of see how those two goals meld together. So they're really Moms for Liberty was a big, organization recently that was geared towards this. They try this over and over again in many different ways, but it's a twofold. It's to try and inject religion into public schools, but also the long-term goal is to just wind down the concept of public education altogether.
And would it be fair to say that, as an example, the Catholic Church is opposed to birth control because they're motivated to force more women to have more kids so they can tithe in the future?
It's not just the Catholic Church anymore. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of evangelical Protestants. And I think, for a long, long time, the anti-reproductive rights movement was focused pretty squarely on abortion for, A, they thought it was politically an easier lift.
Right.
And B, excuse me, I think they thought that there was a real chance that that banning abortion would help accomplish a lot of their anti-feminist goals, right, of depriving women of the economic opportunities and equality that we've been gaining. But I think it became clear for them after a while that, particularly with the kind of middle-class white women who have been having fewer children than they want them to have, it's not really abortion that is being used for that so much as contraception. So they've been, and this started before Trump. It's been, for about 15 years easily that there's been a lot of strategizing in the religious right on how to turn contraception into an issue just as controversial and emotional as abortion traditionally has been, so that they had leverage to start restricting access to it. They still, I think, are struggling on the messaging on that, but one of the scary things about Project 2025 is the whole purpose of it is to get past having to sell their ideas to the public, so they can just force it, and it doesn't really matter if you like it or not.
Because I think a component of it goes along with a different section than the stuff we've been talking about so far is, of course, gutting, closing many of the bureaucracies, the agencies. But the agencies that remain become purely political appointees and not civil servants, because one of the things that saved us last time around when Trump took over by accident or unexpectedly is that he just kind of fucked around and fumbled through the job, having no idea what to do. And there were people that would say no to some of his crazier ideas. Well, now they seem to be emboldened and think that they can just pretty much fire anybody and everybody that they don't like. And anyone that wants to replace them has to swear allegiance to the king. I mean, the fascist, I mean, the leader, the dictator, Trump. And who's there? Who's the adult in the room? There is no adult left in the room. It's whatever crazy thing Trump wants to do. And as long as he pays lip service to the oil companies and a few other ginormous cash creating entities and the religious people, they've got his back. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, that's a fair summary. And, I think a huge thing to understand is that the Supreme Court just ruled that if the president commits crimes in office, it's immunity, as long as it's quote-unquote official. So all the previous laws that sort of restricted the president from firing federal, non-political bureaucrats for political reasons have functionally been terminated.
Well, and I think you're right, of course. But even more weird is it's not just that anything done, as an active or as a, for a purpose, but the president can then interpret that as he can do anything that he wants because you have to take him to court and prove that it wasn't an official act, and then it has to go through the system over several years and get to the Supreme Court, which may still say, oh, no, that would be included too. And so with that knowledge, the administration would pretty much be able to do any fucking thing that it wants, because in the past, there would be people going, I think that's illegal, Mr. President. You might end up in jail. Now they'd be like, yeah, do whatever you want. So even if there is a penalty, it's so unlikely and so far removed, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and Ketanji Brown Jackson basically said as much in her dissent. She was just like, look, this has made it impossible for White House counsel to caution the president against breaking the law.
Right, because what law could he possibly break? I mean, if it's what was the phrase, an official act? So
yeah. And personnel management is technically an official act.
Yeah, and if he thinks someone is a threat to the country, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and locks them up, that's an official act, right? I guess they would interpret it that way. And politicians, do journalists, do podcasters now have to be a little more concerned, or is that part of the problem that we might actually filter ourselves to stay safe? Not you, because you're not gonna. I get that. But I mean others.
I mean, I would be lying if I denied that it's not scary, or if I said it wasn't scary. I mean, it's terrifying. And it's not just imprisoning people. And in fact, there's actually kind of incentives for killing people, because if you imprison them, there is always the chance that they would still have to be charged with something. They would still have to be tried, and then they would be released, because there's still weird systematic barriers to imprisoning people right now in the U.S., so they may be working on that too. But if you just drone strike a journalist you don't like, and you say, well, I thought they were a threat to national security.
Right.
The person who did the drone strike might go to prison that's a little unclear still, because it is still an illegal order. But the president who ordered it is off scot-free.
Well, the funny thing is that if the president makes an order, that becomes an official act and can't be illegal, right? I mean,
for him, again, it's not actually super clear if the person who follows it goes to prison.
Right.
And I don't think Trump, but the thing is, Trump doesn't care.
Oh,
and he could pardon them.
Well,
he could pardon them.
Yeah, as long as they do something that's a federal crime or not a federal crime, but if it's a state, maybe not yet. And I don't know if this was in 2025, Project 2025, but what about after 4 years of Trump? He can't run for president, but could he be vice president and then the president resigns?
I mean, he could also just not run again and say he's still president.
And just not leave.
I have to point out that everything that Trump, there's all sorts of laws and restrictions that should, in theory, keep him from running for office right now, and the Supreme Court has nullified all of them, including the 14th Amendment, which says that somebody who incites an insurrection cannot run for office.
Right.
Or hold office. And so they've already just basically flat out denied the 14th Amendment's plain text. So we're in a weird situation here where if Trump gets into office and he does what I think anyone who has watched the man's psychology could predict he'll do, which is simply not leave.
Right.
Whether he loses, or is term limited out or whatever, the reason is. And he will just simply say, I don't accept that. I'm still president. And I have no reason to think that the Supreme Court wouldn't go along with that. And any acts he takes to make sure that no one defies his newly invented power to just stay president, all the acts he would take to keep himself in office would be criminal, but they would also be official acts. So now he's immune from prosecution. So
yeah, because he could just say there's no such thing as mail-in ballots. He could say that only one polling station per city. So someplace like Atlanta gets one polling station, but each surrounding suburb is a different city. He can't do any of that legally. Those are all controlled by state government. Well, theoretically.
But a lot of the stuff that we saw in 2020, that has come out, for instance, him trying to order the military to seize boxes of ballots I assume to be destroyed. It was a little hazy what they wanted to be done with them. But he could definitely. Now, again, he's in theory term limited out if he wins again. In practice, it turns out that he considers every law a suggestion. If he doesn't like it, he ignores it. And who's going to stand in his way now?
Yeah, because it's really clear he does what his childlike impulses tell him to do, and solve the problems later after you've already done what you wanted to do. And he just got green light from the Supreme Court to go ahead and do those things. So how do we stop it? What's the mechanism for that?
I mean, if he loses the election, that would stop it, I do believe. Like, right now, all of these, like, powers the Supreme Court just granted him only really manifest if he wins.
Right.
So that's step number one, making sure he doesn't win. If that fails, I really wish I had the answer. I don't know. I think we're in uncharted territory, and I really wish I could say, like, I know what the way to fix it, the one neat trick that fixes having a newly installed fascist dictator. But, you know, I will say this, like, I don't want people to give up. You know, fascist dictators fall. They get over their skis. So, you know, they die.
Yeah.
They're bad managers. Like, Donald Trump was he wasn't just a bad president. He was, like, bad at like controlling his office, right?
Yeah.
And this is actually surprisingly common with authoritarian leaders, despite all their hype about all their faith in power and authority. They're not actually very good at management. They tend to surround themselves with people who have really unpleasant personalities. So they're all a bunch of jerks. They're all a bunch of assholes, and they fight all the time. We see this in the Republican, caucus in Congress.
Yeah, true.
Like, everyone, the thing with authoritarians is they all believe that in supreme leaders, but they also imagine they're the, like, best candidate for it. So
it's like Game of Thrones.
They have, yeah, exactly. So they have internal weaknesses which can be exploited. I don't think that we need to just be like, well, we've lost, and just lay down and let him walk over us, you know. I think but I just, unfortunately, right now, I think it's not entirely clear where resistance points will be, but I think that they will become more obvious over time.
Yeah, and of course, the as we hinted at, the big thing is the election, and it's going to, of course, come down to half a dozen states, unless something dramatic happens in Florida, Texas, or California, or New York, or something. It's going to be Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, maybe Georgia, because North Carolina. That's where it's going to be make or break, and I hope that the polls are all wrong, and the Biden wins by a considerable amount. Any thoughts on Biden or Biden being replaced? Is that something you've given thought to?
Yes, much to my chagrin. No, I mean, I just don't think Biden can win. Maybe, I mean, everything's possible. Trump is so scary that, you know, maybe people will get their minds sharpened and focused before the election and will turn out to vote. I'm not feeling super hopeful right now. I can read a poll.
Yeah.
And I can listen to a focus group. And what I'm hearing right now is that Biden's age and his obvious frailty is so visible, so omnipresent, so alarming to voters that they just are struggling to remember that Trump is so scary that, like, it would be better to elect an actual dead person than him.
Yes. Well,
I'm mad at Biden for making that the choice, though. So
yes.
I'm pretty beside myself right now.
Because he had the option to honor his one and done commitment, and he
did technically never say that, and I told so many people that at the time. They were like, "Well, he said he'd only run once." I was like, "He never did. He implied it, but he never said it." And I was like,
and then I also worry because America. That if he steps aside, the Democratic Party would say, well, the next in line is Kamala. And whether she's good or bad, I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about are the people that vote. There's a few percentage of the population that won't vote for her because she's a woman. There's maybe even a few more percent that might not vote for her because she's black. And does that make her the bad candidate, or does that just make us bad people? And do the bad people then win and we still get Trump anyway?
She's polling higher than Biden right now.
Yeah, but as you said, that's a pretty low bar.
I'm a little more sanguine about that. Like, Hillary Clinton did lose in 2020 or 2016, and I think that's solidified in people's imaginations this idea that a woman can't win. And it's like, honestly, like, if you read all the statistics, it's like, it really kind of was a black swan event.
Yeah.
It was a few thousand votes over a few states. She actually won the popular vote. And if it had happened on any other day, if it hadn't been for James Comey and the email crap,
yes. Oh my God.
Clinton would have won. And that a black person can win the presidency has been proved. So I'm honestly a lot more sanguine than a lot of people. I think people, when you actually like listen to folks in focus groups talking about Kamala Harris, they don't like her, but that's kind of like because they don't know her. Like,
right.
They always talk about how she seems to be out of sight, and they assume it must be something bad. And it's like, well, but if she was the candidate, she wouldn't be out of sight anymore.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things. I want the Democrats to have so many people out on every news station, everything, just like before we went into Iraq, when the Republicans had a dozen people on every show every day. I mean, The View, cooking shows. Every show should have somebody from the Democratic Party on there talking about the wonderful things that have happened during this last administration, and how, whether it's Biden or somebody else, we're going to keep doing those kinds of things, but we're not. They're not.
Well, I think that they're trying.
Yeah.
I honestly don't blame them. I think I can tell you from my perspective as a journalist and a media person that the real problem here is twofold. Like, when you're a producer on a show, like, that kind of content is just death to ratings. It's just death to ratings. And the reason is, first of all, people don't want to talk about the past. They want to talk about the future. And so, like, kind of like listing your accomplishments is, people are like, yeah, well, what have you done for me lately?
Right.
Or really more, what are you going to do for me? And second of all, like, it's boring in and of itself. Like, there's no conflict. And people complain and complain and complain about how the news media is driven by conflict and, snazzy stuff. And forget that it's not that journalists want that. It's just that if you want anyone to pay attention, that's kind of what you have to do. So, it's just a structural issue that I don't know there's any way around it. Like, I have definitely found success in getting people to read articles about policy successes from Democrats, but only if I frame it in maximally conflict-driven terms, right?
Yeah.
Like, here's the policy, the Biden policy that the tech billionaires don't want you to know about, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And
it's kind of always been that way. Humans, just are weird. So, man, I don't know. Is there anything else about Project 2025 that we should cover before I let you go back to doing your actual work instead of hanging with me?
Well, I really think there's a lot of great talk about what's in it, and I think that's really important, and people should go read some of the summaries that are out there, because there's so much information in there. But I really, for your audience especially, want to underscore that this is part of a very religious project that is not being discussed nearly enough in the mainstream media. That the impetus behind Project 2025 is Christian nationalism. It is about a very specific worldview that's rooted in the teachings of the fake historian David Barton,
Yeah.
who has spent his entire career pretending that the separation between church and state is a myth. It's very much a reality. And this entire document is in no small part about just smashing the First Amendment to bits, just tearing it to shreds, and imposing their very narrow and often non-textually justified view of Christianity on the entire country, and making everyone who is not their flavor of Christian a second-class citizen. And so I really think that's important to understand, because it helps you understand how all these policies hang together as well.
Right. Yeah, it's some scary, crazy stuff, and part of me wishes that we had an actual official religion in our country, because then people could rebel against it. But instead we have a la carte, and now a bunch of different small organizations have gotten together and become big organizations, and they wield political power because it's not a religion per se, or it's a relationship, or whatever crap that they say. But yeah, I worry, Amanda.
Yeah, you should be worried.
Yeah.
You should be worried, but you shouldn't give up.
Don't give up. Never give up, never surrender. Is that how that goes?
Yes, exactly.
Excellent. Well, Amanda, how can people reach you? Where should they read you? Is it mostly Salon these days, or are you in other places?
Yeah, I'm the senior politics writer for Salon.com, and I have a newsletter there you can sign up for at Salon.com/newsletter. It's called Standing Room Only.
Excellent. And how can people contact you if they want to have you come speak at a convention or on a podcast, for example?
My email that you can reach out to for speaking engagements or other such things is A Marcotte, MARCOTTE, at Salon.com.
Excellent. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for visiting and spending time and helping to educate my listeners.
Thanks for having me on. Good to talk to you, Phil.
The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Investments should be based on your personal situation, and you, of course, should consult with your financial advisor or tax professional before taking any action.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
Section 3. The Ten Commandments. Some Christian lawyers, some eminent and stupid judges have said and still say that the Ten Commandments are the foundation of all law. Nothing could be more absurd. Long before these commandments were given, there were codes of laws in India and Egypt, laws against murder, perjury, larceny, adultery, and fraud. Such laws are as old as human society, as old as the love of life, as old as industry, as the idea of prosperity, as old as human love. All of the Ten Commandments that are good were old. All that were new are foolish. If Jehovah had been civilized, he would have left out the commandment about keeping the Sabbath, and in its place would have said, "Thou shalt not enslave thy fellow men." He would have omitted the one about swearing and said, "The man shall have but one wife, and the woman but one husband." He would have left out the one about graven images, and in its stead would have said, "Thou shalt not wage wars of extermination, and thou shalt not unsheath the sword except in self-defense." If Jehovah had been civilized, how much grander the Ten Commandments would have been. All that we call progress, the enfranchisement of man, of labor, the substitution of imprisonment for death, of fine for imprisonment, the destruction of polygamy, the establishing of free speech, of the rights of conscience, in short, all that has tended to the development and civilization of man, all the results of investigation, observation, experience, and free thought, all that man has accomplished for the benefit of man since the close of the Dark Ages has been done in spite of the Old Testament. Let me further illustrate the morality, the mercy, the philosophy, and goodness of the Old Testament. The story of Achan. Joshua took the city of Jericho. Before the fall of the city, he declared that all the spoil taken should be given to the Lord. In spite of this order, Achan secreted a garment, some silver and gold. Afterward, Joshua tried to take the city of Ai. He failed, and many of his soldiers were slain. Joshua sought for the cause of his defeat, and he found that Achan had secreted a garment, 200 shekels of silver and a wedge of gold. To this Achan confessed. And thereupon Joshua took Achan, his sons, and his daughters, his oxen, and his sheep, stoned them all to death, and burned their bodies. There's nothing to show that the sons and daughters had committed any crime. Certainly the oxen and sheep should not have been stoned to death for the crime of their owner. This was the justice, the mercy of Jehovah. After Joshua had committed this crime, with the help of Jehovah, he captured the city of Ai. The story of Elisha. And he went up thence into Bethel, and as he was going up by the way, there came forth little children out of the city, and mocked him, and said unto him, Go up, thou bald head. And he turned back, and looked at them, and cursed them in the name of the Lord. And there came forth 2 she-bears out of the wood, and tore 42 children of them. This was the work of the good God, the merciful Jehovah. The story of Daniel. King Darius had honored and exalted Daniel, and the native princes were jealous. So they induced the king to sign a decree to the effect that any man who should make a petition to any god or man except to King Darius for 30 days should be cast into the den of lions. Afterward these men found that Daniel, with his face toward Jerusalem, prayed 3 times a day to Jehovah. Thereupon Daniel was cast into the den of lions. A stone was placed at the mouth of the den and sealed with the king's seal. The king passed a bad night. The next morning he went to the den and cried out to Daniel. Daniel answered and told the king that God had sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions. Darius, being then a believer in the true God, sent for the men who had accused Daniel, and for their wives and their children, and cast them all into the lions' den. And the lions had the mastery of them, and brake all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the pit. What had the wives and little children done? How had they offended King Darius, the believer in Jehovah? Who protected Daniel? Jehovah. Who failed to protect the innocent wives and children? Jehovah. The story of Joseph. Pharaoh had a dream, and this dream was interpreted by Joseph. According to this interpretation, there was to be in Egypt 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph advised Pharaoh to buy all the surplus of the 7 plentiful years and store it up against the years of famine. Pharaoh appointed Joseph as his minister or agent and ordered him to buy the grain of the plentiful years. Then came the famine. The people came to the king for help. He told them to go to Joseph and do as he said. Joseph sold corn to the Egyptians until all their money was gone, until he had it all. When the money was gone, the people said, Give us corn, and we'll give you our cattle. Joseph let them have corn until all their cattle, their horses, and their flocks had been given to him. Then the people said, Give us corn, and we will give you our lands. So Joseph let them have corn until all their lands were gone. But the famine continued, and so the poor wretches sold themselves, and they became the servants of Pharaoh. Then Joseph gave them seed, and made an agreement with them that they should forever give 1/5 of all they raised to Pharaoh. Who enabled Joseph to interpret the dream of Pharaoh? Jehovah. Did he know at the time that Joseph would use the information thus given to rob and enslave the people of Egypt? Yes. Who produced the famine? Jehovah. It is perfectly apparent that the Jews did not think of Jehovah as the God of Egypt, the God of all the world. He was their God, and theirs alone. Other nations had gods, but Jehovah was the greatest of all. He hated other nations and other gods, and abhorred all religions except the worship of himself.
Once again, thank you for listening to the show. If you have questions or topic ideas, you can email me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. Did forget to mention in the opening stuff, computers. I had some computer fun, I tell you, over the last week and a half. About a week ago, we had a lightning strike pretty close to the house in Florida. and lights blinked, went off and on. Some lights did not come back on. Other lights did. The main panel in the garage, a few of the circuit breakers tripped because that's how powerful the surge on the lines were, or the proximity of the lightning. I don't know exactly, but it looked like everything was okay with the exception of one item. My main desktop computer was dead. Now, I had a backup laptop, a travel laptop, so I can do most of my work and talk to clients and stuff when I travel, but that I was able to use. So I was never without a computer, but I needed my desktop to work. And so one of the problems I have is that maybe this computer could be dropped off at a computer repair shop, and hopefully it's just a problem with the transformer inside of the case. But I can't. I cannot take a computer that might have client information on it, or even the ability to get on the websites that might have client information. I can't leave that with somebody else. So in the past, I've just replaced computers, and the old computer is taken apart for parts, or I bulk erase the hard drive or whatever. And virtually everything is backed up through different systems online, so I don't lose anything. But I definitely cannot give that computer to somebody and say, yes, I'll come back and pick it up after you fix it in a week. So I have to look around to see if there's a shop that will see if they can check the transformer, maybe replace a new one in real time while I'm standing there watching them do it. If no one is willing to do that, or if I can't find someone that can come to the house to do that, it just becomes a very heavy paperweight, or then I have to take it apart and dismantle it and throw it away myself, because I cannot risk, for the price of a new computer, I cannot risk anyone's information being compromised. It's so very important. I'm sure if you're a client, you understand, you appreciate that, I hope. This time I went to Best Buy, which I like Best Buy to a point because they have a lot of computers that you can just walk in and pick something off the shelf. And I told them what I needed, and they suggested a computer for me. And it was very similar to the one that got hit by lightning or damaged by lightning. And I said, yeah, that would do it. But do you have something that's more expensive? And the lady's like, well, I'm not used to that. People want to pay less money. And I said, yeah, that's normally me too. But this time I'm going to go high end. So I bought this bad boy gaming computer that I adore it. I should have been spending this kind of money on computers before. It is so fast and so magical. I haven't yet mixed together a full episode with the audio files and then saved it, but I have done individual pieces and saved them. And it probably takes 10 to 15% of the time my other machines took to save an audio file. So it's fantastic. The video card has 12 gig of RAM on board. The main board is 32 gigs. So just wicked memory on the motherboard, 12 gigs on the video card. And I think my son said it about as good as one can say it. I think he said something along the lines of, Dad, I think your new computer's video card is more of a computer than any computer you've ever owned as a computer. And I think he's right. Maybe I've had a desktop with 16 gigabytes of RAM, and this only has 12, but the processing power, and of course it's a brand new chipset. I think it's 20 core chipset for the computer. And like I said, very fast. It's not only air cooled, but liquid cooled over the chip. So it's not going to get hot. And of course that means it's going to draw some serious electricity, at least compared to a more petite, more dainty computer. But I really do enjoy it. Everything is noticeably faster. And maybe I have to find a game to play to justify having a gaming computer, because it just doesn't seem right to keep playing Civilization 5 on this beast of a machine. Anywho, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you for listening. Hopefully I'll see you at BajaCon. More details in the previous episode, but BajaCon just over the border in Canada, outside of Detroit. That's where I'll be next in August. And I hope to see you there. If you do see me, feel free to come up and say hello. Until then, ciao.
Section 4. What is it all worth? Will some Christian scholar tell us the value of Genesis? We know that it's not true, that it contradicts itself. There are two accounts of the creation in the first and second chapters. In the first account, birds and beasts were created before man. In the second, man was created before the birds and beasts. In the first, fowls are made out of the water. In the second, fowls are made out of the ground. In the first, Adam and Eve are created together. In the second, Adam is made, then the beasts and the birds, and then Eve is created from one of Adam's ribs. These stories are far older than the Pentateuch. Persian. God created the world in 6 days, a man called Adama, a woman called Eva, and then rested. The Etruscan, Babylonian, Phoenician, Chaldean, and the Egyptian stories are much the same. The Persians, Greeks, Egyptians, Chinese, and Hindus have their Garden of Eden and the Tree of Life. So, the Persians, the Babylonians, the Nubians, the people of southern India, all had the story of the fall of man and the subtle serpent. The Chinese say that sin came into the world by the disobedience of woman. And even the Tahitians tell us that man was created from the earth and the first woman from one of his bones. All these stories are equally authentic and of equal value to the world, and all the authors were equally inspired. We know also that the story of the flood is much older than the book of Genesis, and we know besides that it is not true. We know that this story in Genesis was copied from the Chaldean. There you find all about the rain, the ark, the animals, the dove that was sent out 3 times, and the mountain on which the ark rested. So, the Hindus, Chinese, Parsis, Persians, Greeks, Mexicans, and Scandinavians have substantially the same story. We also know that the account of the Tower of Babel is an ignorant and childish fable. What then is left in this inspired book of Genesis? Is there a word calculated to develop the heart or brain? Is there an elevated thought, any great principle, anything poetic, any word that bursts into blossom? Is there anything except a dreary and detailed statement of things that never happened? Is there anything in Exodus calculated to make men generous, loving, and noble? Is it well to teach children that God tortured the innocent cattle of the Egyptians, bruised them to death with hailstones, on account of the sins of Pharaoh? Does it make us merciful to believe that God killed the firstborn of the Egyptians, the firstborn of the poor and suffering people, of the poor girl working at the mill, because of the wickedness of the king? Can we believe that the gods of Egypt worked miracles? Did they change water into blood and sticks into serpents? In Exodus, there is not one original thought or line of value. We know, if we know anything, that this book was written by savages who believed in slavery, polygamy, and wars of extermination. We know that the story told is impossible, and that the miracles were never performed. This book admits that there are other gods besides Jehovah. In the 17th chapter is this verse, "Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, for in the thing wherein they dealt proudly he was above them." So, in this blessed book is taught the duty of human sacrifice, the sacrifice of babes. In the 22nd chapter is this command, "Thou shalt not delay to offer the first of thy ripe fruits and of thy liquors, the firstborn of thy sons thou shalt give unto me." Has Exodus been a help or a hindrance to the human race? Take from Exodus the laws common to all nations, and is there anything of value left? Is there anything in Leviticus of importance? Is there a chapter worth reading? What interest have we in the clothes of priests, the curtains and candles of the tabernacle, the tongs and shovels of the altar, or the hair oil used by the Levites? Of what use the cruel code, the frightful punishments, the curses, the falsehoods, and the miracles of this ignorant and infamous book? And what is there in the book of Numbers, with its sacrifices and water of jealousy, with its shewbread and spoons, its kids and fine flour, its oil and candlesticks, its cucumbers, onions, and manna, to assist and instruct mankind? What interest have we in the rebellion of Korah, the water of separation, the ashes of a red heifer, the brazen serpent, the water that followed the people uphill and down for 40 years, and the inspired donkey of the prophet Balaam? Have these absurdities and cruelties, these childish, savage superstitions, helped civilize the world? Is there anything in Joshua, with its wars, its murders and massacres, its swords dripping with the blood of mothers and babes, its tortures, maimings, and mutilations, its fraud and fury, its hatred and revenge, calculated to improve the world? Does not every chapter shock the heart of a good man? Is it a book to be read by children? The book of Joshua is as merciless as famine, as ferocious as the heart of a wild beast. It is a history, a justification, a sanctification of nearly every crime. The book of Judges is about the same, nothing but war and bloodshed. The horrible story of Jael and Sisera, of Gideon and his trumpets and pitchers, of Jephthah and his daughter whom he murdered to please Jehovah. Here we find the story of Samson, in which a sun god is changed to a Hebrew giant. Read this book of Joshua. Read of the slaughter of women, of wives, of mothers and babes. Read its impossible miracles, its ruthless crimes, and all done according to the commands of Jehovah, and tell me whether this book is calculated to make us forgiving, generous, and loving. I admit that the history of Ruth is in some respects a beautiful and touching story, that it is naturally told, and that her love for Naomi was deep and pure. But in the matter of courtship, we would hardly advise our daughters to follow the example of Ruth. Still, we must remember that Ruth was a widow. Is there anything worth reading in the first and second books of Samuel? Ought a prophet of God to hew a captured king in pieces? Is the story of the ark, its capture and return, of importance to us? Is it possible that it was right, just and merciful to kill 50,000 men because they had looked into a box? Of what use to us are the wars of Saul and David, the stories of Goliath and the witch of Endor? Why should Jehovah have killed Uzzah for putting forth his hand to steady the ark, and forgiven David for murdering Uriah and stealing his wife? According to Samuel, David took a census of the people. This excited the wrath of Jehovah, and as a punishment, he allowed David to choose 7 years of famine, a flight of 3 months from pursuing enemies, or 3 days of pestilence. David, having confidence in God, chose the 3 days of pestilence, and thereupon God the Compassionate, on account of the sin of David, killed 70,000 innocent men. Under the same circumstances, what would a devil have done? Is there anything in 1st and 2nd Kings that suggests the idea of inspiration? When David is dying, he tells his son Solomon to murder Joab, not to let his hoary head go down to the grave in peace. With his last breath, he commands his son to bring down the hoary head of Shimei to the grave with blood. Having uttered these merciful words, the good David, the man after God's heart, slept with his fathers. Was it necessary to inspire the man who wrote the history of the building of the temple, the story of the visit of the Queen of Sheba, or to tell the number of Solomon's wives? What care we for the withering of Jeroboam's hand, the prophecy of Jehu, or the story of Elijah and the ravens? Can we believe that Elijah brought flames from heaven, or that he went at last to paradise in a chariot of fire? Can we believe in the multiplication of the widow's oil by Elisha, that an army was smitten with blindness, or that an axe floated in the water? Does it civilize us to read about the beheading of the 70 sons of Ahab, the putting out of the eyes of Zedekiah, and the murder of his sons? Is there one word in 1st and 2nd Kings calculated to make men better? 1st and 2nd Chronicles is but a retelling of what is told in 1st and 2nd Kings. The same old stories, a little left out, a little added, but in no respect made better or worse. The book of Ezra is of no importance. He tells us that Cyrus, king of Persia, issued a proclamation for building a temple at Jerusalem, and that he declared Jehovah to be the real and only God. Nothing could be more absurd. Ezra tells us about the return from captivity, the building of the temple, the dedication, a few prayers, and this is all. This book is of no importance, of no use. Nehemiah is about the same, only it tells of the building of the wall, the complaints of the people about taxes, a list of those who returned from Babylon, a catalogue of those who dwelt at Jerusalem, and the dedication of the walls. Not a word in Nehemiah worth reading. Then comes the book of Esther. In this we are told that King Ahasuerus was intoxicated, that he sent for his queen Vashti to come and show herself to him and his guests. Vashti refused to appear. This maddened the king, and he ordered that from every province the most beautiful girl should be brought before him, that he might choose one in place of Vashti. Among others was brought Esther, a Jewess. She was chosen and became the wife of the king. Then a gentleman by the name of Haman wanted to have all the Jews killed, and the king, not knowing that Esther was of that race, signed a decree that all the Jews should be killed. Through the efforts of Mordecai and Esther, the decree was annulled, and the Jews were saved. Haman prepared a gallows on which to have Mordecai hanged, but the good Esther so managed matters that Haman and his 10 sons were hanged on the gallows that Haman had built, and the Jews were allowed to murder more than 75,000 of the king's subjects. This is the inspired story of Esther. In the book of Job, we find some elevated sentiments, some sublime and foolish thoughts, something of the wonder and sublimity of nature, the joys and sorrows of life, but the story is infamous. Some of the Psalms are good, many are indifferent, a few are infamous. In them are mingled the vices and virtues. There are verses that elevate, verses that degrade. There are prayers for forgiveness and revenge. In the literature of the world there is nothing more heartless, more infamous than the 109th Psalm. In the Proverbs there is much shrewdness, many pithy and prudent maxims, many wise sayings. The same ideas are expressed in many ways, the wisdom of economy and silence, the dangers of vanity and idleness. Some are trivial, some are foolish, and many are wise. These proverbs are not generous, not altruistic. Sayings to the same effect are found among all nations. Ecclesiastes is the most thoughtful book in the Bible. It was written by an unbeliever, a philosopher, an agnostic. Take out the interpolations, and it is in accordance with the thought of the 19th century. In this book are found the most philosophic and poetic passages in the Bible. After crossing the desert of death and crime, after reading the Pentateuch, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles, it is delightful to reach this grove of palms called the Song of Solomon. A drama of love, of human love, a poem without Jehovah, a poem born of the heart and true to the divine instincts of the soul. I sleep, but my heart waketh. Isaiah is the work of several. Its swollen words, its vague imagery, its prophecies and curses, its ravings against kings and nations, its laughter at the wisdom of man, its hatred of joy, have not the slightest tendency to increase the well-being of man. In this book is recorded the absurdest of all miracles. The shadow on the dial is turned back 10 degrees in order to satisfy Hezekiah that Jehovah will add 15 years to his life. In this miracle, the world, turning from west to east at the rate of more than 1,000 miles an hour, is not only stopped, but made to turn the other way until the shadow on the dial went back 10 degrees. Is there in the whole world an intelligent man or woman who believes this impossible falsehood? Jeremiah contains nothing of importance, no facts of value, nothing but fault-finding, lamentations, croakings, wailings, curses and promises, nothing but famine and prayer, the prosperity of the wicked, the ruin of the Jews, the captivity and return, and at last Jeremiah the traitor in the stocks and in prison. And Lamentations is simply a continuance of the ravings of the same insane pessimist. Nothing but dust and sackcloth and ashes, tears and howls, railings and revilings. And Ezekiel, eating manuscripts, prophesying siege and desolation, with visions of coals of fire, and cherubim, and wheels with eyes, and the type and figure of the boiling pot, and the resurrection of dry bones, is of no use, of no possible value. With Voltaire, I say that anyone who admires Ezekiel should be compelled to dine with him. Daniel is a disordered dream, a nightmare. What can be made of this book with its image with a golden head, with breast and arms of silver, with belly and thighs of brass, with legs of iron, and with feet of iron and clay, with its writing on the wall, its den of lions, and its vision of the ram and goat? Is there anything to be learned from Hosea and his wife? Is there anything of use in Joel, in Amos, in Obadiah? Can we get any good from Jonah and his gourd? Is it possible that God is the real author of Micah and Nahum, of Habakkuk and Zephaniah, of Haggai and Malachi and Zechariah, with his red horses, his 4 horns, his 4 carpenters, his flying roll, his mountains of brass, and the stone with 4 eyes? Is there anything in these inspired books that has been of benefit to man? Have they taught us how to cultivate the earth, to build houses, to weave cloth, to prepare food? Have they taught us to paint pictures, to chisel statues, to build bridges or ships, or anything of beauty or of use? Did we get our ideas of government, of religious freedom, of the liberty of thought from the Old Testament? Did we get from any of these books a hint of any science? Is there in the sacred volume a word, a line, that has added to the wealth, the intelligence, and the happiness of mankind? Is there one of the books of the Old Testament as entertaining as Robinson Crusoe, the Travels of Gulliver, or Peter Wilkins and his flying wife? Did the author of Genesis know as much about nature as Humboldt, or Darwin, or Haeckel? Is what is called the Mosaic Code as wise or as merciful as the code of any civilized nation? Were the writers of Kings and Chronicles as great historians, as great writers as Gibbon and Draper? Is Jeremiah or Habakkuk equal to Dickens or Thackeray? Can the authors of Job and the Psalms be compared with Shakespeare? Why should we attribute the best to man and the worst to God?